What's up, everyone? I'm here to do the latest chapter of Attack on Titan. I've read it already, so we're just going to be doing a review slash discussion. And let's just begin with the chapter. This is the latest chapter. I can't imagine that it's only 60 chapters in. Can you believe that? It may be just because how I've been watching the anime when I started, and those sort of extend how long the manga chapters are. But this chapter, there's definitely some very interesting stuff. The first thing was just the way that it's drawn, um, and just the dramatic, I would say, sequence of the scenes. It just works well, and I think it works with the dialogue very well. I thought it was, I wouldn't say ingenious because it wasn't to that extent, but it was pretty interesting how they set it up so that first you see these wounded people who have like wounds on their legs. Then I believe his name's Levi, doing his sort of interrogation, and then you see Levi sort of explaining everything, and then saying, "Don't worry, we did not actually kill all your men. We just cut off their legs." And then while he's explaining that, you see the sequence of this survey corps pretty much come in and take out all these guys without killing them, which is quite amazing. Honestly, it's somewhat supernatural, exactly how they are able to beat all these people with guns, with just their swords and their 3D maneuvering gear. Obviously, they do have the element of surprise, but just from a realistic standpoint, I do know that there's always that element of chance involved, and generally there would always be more casualties for every single like a fight like this. But they did their thing, and it was quite supernatural and amazing how they all just sort of swoop in, somewhat like Batman with their 3D maneuvering gear, and just take these people out. I also think it's a great nod at Levi as a character, because a ruthless leader could have also asked his troops just to kill all of them. And Levi is obviously a man who, especially in this chapter, is depicted as someone who is ruthless but willing to kill people, and do bad things, but won't do it when he doesn't need to. And it shows a nicer side to him that's sort of been implied throughout these last dozen chapters. Levi obviously then goes on to do some ruthless stuff in order to interrogate this person. Obviously not as bad as previous interrogations have been in Attack on Titan, and obviously there's he obviously is doing a lot of crazy stuff, knocking this guy's teeth out, kicking him in the head, really mutilating this guy in order to get some sort of information out of him. And it illustrates how the real world works in a certain extent, and how you realistically have to do some sort of this stuff in order to create or achieve a greater good. That is a theme in a lot of movies, like the film Watchmen. Levi understands that, hey, he can't just go through life and achieve the outcome he wants, which in this case is it's kind of unclear somewhat, but it's generally the fact that he wants the truth revealed. He wants to know what's going on with the central government and the whole conspiracy with the Titans. And he feels like there's a lot of almost communistic control of everything, to the point where everyone's brainwashed. Anyone who doesn't abide by the sort of fantasy world that has been instilled gets immediately killed, or they disappear. And so Levi is obviously illustrated here doing a bunch of stuff, but at the same time having a heart. But I think he's one of the most perfect leaders because he doesn't have weakness. He's not like too tender-hearted to the point where he's not willing to make sacrifices, and he's not willing to kill if he has to. But at the same time, he's not a ruthless, cold, evil person to a point where he just slaughters innocent people when he doesn't need to. And this was illustrated in this chapter when he ordered his people just to literally wound these men so they couldn't walk. Moving on from there, this guy he's interrogating is throwing back a lot of crap, whether it's to mess with Levi's mind or more so because he literally just believes this stuff. We don't know. Probably both. But he says all this stuff about how the Survey Corps is horrible, how he should turn himself in, otherwise everyone captured will be slaughtered and executed. So it looks like Levi was somewhat influenced by it, but he didn't let that get to him, and he pretty much said, hey, that's not going to do it. You can't get under my skin. You can't get me to surrender myself in order to save my my colleagues, because that was the obvious plea. And I definitely feel like Levi and I are on the same path. We understand that there's something going on here that needs to be discovered, and we can't just give up right now and listen to this guy, because it's not as simple as that, and we are willing to sacrifice, and we do not want, we've gone through so much to prevent ourselves from being discovered. I'm not going to just turn myself in, and the people who sacrifice themselves and might get executed, Erwin might get executed, he understands this too. They understand this too. And so finally, we get to this little dialogue with the printing press members, and honestly, I do have to say though, it really, I would say, puts forth a new perspective, because first off, it just cements in the fact that people, that this sort of governmental system is very much, I wouldn't call it completely communistic, but like similar, where it's sort of like it's a fabricated truth, the whole society, and obviously something fishy is going on, and anyone who has any questions gets snuffed out immediately. If you just look at someone like, for instance, Levi, not Levi, like if you look at any of the people who have come in to the city and question anything, they just immediately disappear. And that was pretty much emphasized in this chapter. And when I was watching the anime, they had these little 10-second breaks with a little like story halfway through each episode, and a lot of stories were sort of implying this from an early standpoint onwards. I don't know how they already decided to put that in, or invented it so early on. Perhaps the author worked with the anime, but it wasn't until like this chapter or recently when it was really brought about that, hey, people have been constantly snuffed out when they try to dig under the wall or do something. Like the wall in itself is such a huge mystery. Like for the author to think up something like that, like, hey, if you break down the wall, there are titans sleeping inside of it. Like that's just, it's a huge plot twister. And I think I'm starting, after reading a lot of these books or mangas, you start to get an idea of how these authors think of it. And I really feel like sometimes they're just like, hey, why don't we put this bizarre, crazy thing in there? I'll figure out later how to explain it. And obviously, it's going to require some bizarre, twisted explanation. But that's the sort of stuff that needs to be done to bring about the conspiracy, amazing plot twisters that like only stuff like Attack on Titan can bring about. And so finally, we get to the whole thing with the Reeves Corporation and the Reeves son. And in my opinion, the Reeves son is quite a coward up until this chapter. Like, I would say, okay, there's a couple chapters earlier where he wasn't that much of a coward, But it's definitely becoming more and more clear that, hey, this isn't just some side character. The author has decided to make him a more, at least a supporting character. And at first he was introduced as a one-dimensional character, but now he has come full circle. He's become more three-dimensional, and this chapter is the first time where his whole demeanor, his posture, his facial expressions, his body language has completely changed from this coward, somewhat spoiled, ignorant, antagonistic boy who is sort of against this whole Survey Corps thing into what it is now, where his father's death acted as a catalyst for him to become not just a man, but a man who embodied his father's philosophy and is now doing the right thing and doing a lot of stuff that a lot of people wouldn't do and only a true man would, such as standing up for the Survey Corps, protecting the village, doing all this stuff, acting as bait in order to draw out these men, and in order for these printing people to see what's going on. Obviously, you know, the two employees in the printing press, it very much illustrates how throughout their dialogue that, hey, this whole thing is a sham. Like the elderly employee who was the head of it pretty much was like, hey, I knew this whole thing was pretty much sham. All the media that's put forth, somewhat like North Korea, is just being completely controlled by the government. It's all just propaganda and brainwashing. But hey, I got my family to protect. I'd rather want my family alive than any harm to become with them, so I'm living with the sham. And again, just a little tip off. I'm tipping my hat off at one of the panels when I just thought it was quite amazing how she just popped in there. You know, she's just like these two are talking in the printing press, and then out of nowhere, you know, right, they're like somewhat like what happens in the Dark Knight trilogy. You know, Batman just shows up out of the blue. It's like, it was like, hey Pierre, pardon my intrusion. I'm the commander of the Survey Corps, Hang Zoe, and according to this newspaper, I'm also currently a fugitive. And then they're both like shocked because she's literally standing right there. And I think it's just amazing. It works really well because without this 3D maneuvering gear thing, it's like how on earth can people do this without supernatural powers? And for them to be able to, for the author to invent something like this, where they can make humans from a somewhat realistic standpoint, rather than the use of, you know, supernatural magical powers as in other manga, for them to just, you know, pop in there, it just demonstrates their skill, and it's just really awesome. But you know, the final thing I do have to say though is obviously the printing press, you know, they're still not really sure what to do. Who knows if this is actually going to go anywhere. Honestly, that guy who was pretty much tricked and baited by the son of Hangs, he pretty much was correct. He was like, hey, not the son of Hangs, the son of Reeves. Basically, he was pretty much correct. He's like, hey, what's it gonna matter? Like, if this little town speaks up, you're just gonna be snuffed out. The government's gonna crack down. It doesn't matter that you've sort of exposed the truth, to the town. And sure, it will be up to the printing press, but at the same time, it's still, you know, somewhat unclear what can they do. Like, the printing press in itself, like, sure, they can release a story, but the government could just like take them out immediately afterwards, throw out another story similar to what happened in One Piece, cough cough, a little bit of a spoiler alert, where they just send out another newspaper, they're saying, hey, what was done was just a lie, do not listen to the last story printed, or something like that. So it's like the whole thing's kind of pointless. Where can they really go? I'm really rooting for them to figure something out, but the author can go two ways, as from my experience reading manga. The author can find out some realistic alternative, or two, he can go along with it and it would just come across really unrealistic and full of plot holes. Like, oh, the whole world believed it once the newspapers were released, and the government didn't think to send out another newspaper saying the first one was fake or anything like that. But we will see once that happens. And I guess, my final tip off to this chapter was this whole thing where the son of the first Reeves was like, he did this badass move where he's like, you're a fool, you're already screwed. I'm already finished with you all. Look up, dumb shit. Excuse me for cursing, but that's what he says. He's like, first off, I just think it's really amazing from him to transform into this cowardly character. Initially, that's what we thought he was, but he was just putting on the act. And then, boom, he's like, I'm done with you guys. Look up, dumb shit. It was just really badass. And then, obviously, the Survey Corps comes down with their 3D maneuvering gear. Boom, they take him out. Honestly, though, despite Hang Zoe doing all this crazy stuff, this combat stuff where she just, in a second gap closes and takes out this guy with a gun, I really am somewhat concerned where things are going. Erwin's obviously been beaten at the end of this chapter. He's about to get executed. Erwin's already, he realizes he may be a martyr for this cause, but it may be for the better. Erwin, I really don't want to die because just himself as a character, how he looks, his personality, the fact that he has one arm, it's just really badass. I don't think his end should be of yet. Again, another tip off to Naruto and Kakashi, spoiler alert, but I don't think, he's too vital of a character right now to just, die. And I mean, I don't know what's going to happen, but hopefully he doesn't die. He's too badass of a character. He really needs to stick around. And at the same time, I am somewhat concerned where the heck they can go with this thing. And although this chapter was pretty decent, again, it still leaves a lot of ends untied. A lot more, in fact. It's like, what can the printing press guide really do? What he says at the end of this chapter is also right. It's like, hey, if we put out this article, they're going to slaughter our families. They're going to kill the printing press. They're going to destroy everything we have. Are you really forcing me to do all this? And that question went unanswered. So what really can Hang Zoe do? And obviously, the author can either disappoint us or overexceed our expectations by figuring out some solution. I'm really rooting for a second one, but I definitely know other manga that have disappointed me in the past. Cough cough fairy tale. But regardless, we'll see what happens. Hopefully they figure something out. Hopefully they don't do just some simplistic beeline solution like force this old man to print the article and then have his family slaughtered and the printing press closed down forever. We don't know what's going to happen, but again, it's very interesting. The final chapter is of Erwin pretty much about to be, the final panel is Erwin about to be executed, and he's severely beaten. So I'm excited to see where it goes. I would have to rate this a solid 8 out of 10, 8.00 out of 10. The reason being, although it was decent, again, it was still kind of slow. I feel like the author's sort of closing in on ends where it's like, where can you really go with this? Like, bring about something, because it feels like the Survey Corps right now is at complete dead ends, and it just seems like they're just a bunch of children running around, somewhat like Lord of the Flies, just thinking they're doing something, but just running around, not really achieving anything. So we really need to see what's going to happen, and if they can actually get anything. If I was in their position, I would at least try and get the two people who were kidnapped back, and then bring them to the basement. But we'll see what happens. As always, like, favorite, comment, and subscribe. I will see you guys later. Thanks for watching. Oh, and as always, check out my main channel, and I have been recently starting to update my Facebook and my Google Plus, both with different stuff. I've mainly been focusing on Google Plus, but I've been updating my Facebook page as well, and those are for my main channel. So the articles and stuff I post on my pages, which you can find via the social media section on my main channel's YouTube. they're mainly on my main channel's topics like business or just weird funny stuff I find, funny videos or funny articles or interesting articles. The most recent one was on emotional intelligence and how it's helpful, an article on that. And so if you want to check those out, the links are below, and you could just like my social media page on Facebook, or whatever. The Google Plus page is again accessible via my main YouTube, which is also linked. It's all linked together. You'll find it. Thanks for watching. As always, like, favorite, comment, subscribe. I'll see you guys later.